All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on TAP 9.4 Fabric Pool Enhancements. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, it's Joseph Kaskassen. I've been in the IT industry for over 8 years now, specializing in helping IT professionals with with their IT skills training needs. And I am located here in Northern California, very near to NetApp's headquarters. I want to go ahead and introduce our technical trainer today. It's Alicia Townsend. As I said earlier, I've been in the IT training industry for over 8 years, and I've known Alicia the whole time. So I want to go ahead and pass it off over to Alicia. Alicia, you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Joseph! I love talking to Joseph. How you doing?
Good, good.
So I just want to say one of the reasons why I chose to do the topic that we're covering today is obviously, ONTAP 9.4, brand new version of the operating system. So it gave me a great excuse to start playing around with it. And I was really kind of excited to see some of the new improvements to FabricPool. And so thus decided to cover that as my topic for today. So Joseph, I kind of changed the script on you, dude.
No, not a problem. But again, I just want to welcome everybody for this webinar. Alicia, if you want to just go ahead and just get started with it. Do you have? Can you go ahead and share? Are you going to be sharing your screen or?
I suppose. I mean, you could just listen to my dulcet voice forever and a day. No, sharing my screen would probably be a little bit more fun. There we go. All right. Thank you so much, sir. Anyway, before I get started, I just want to tell everyone that you can, send any questions that you have throughout the session. I'll try to address some of those while we go through the session itself, and any of the rest maybe at the end of it. If there are too many, you can also drop Joseph an email. So he's joseph.kaskassen. I've known you for 5 million years, and I always have a hard time pronouncing it.
Kaskassen. It's Kaskassen. Yeah.
At quickstart.com, or you can join us at the Expert Connect, which is expertconnect.quickstart.com. So yes. Joseph, I think you already put the link in the chat there somewhere.
Yes, I'll put that on the chat right now.
Awesome. So let's jump right into this guy. So again, one of the new features having to do with ONTAP 9.4 is the improvements to fabric pooling. So before I totally dive into what the new stuff is, I figure we don't want to talk about fabric pooling itself. You might have been working with NetApp for quite some years, but this was a feature that was just introduced in like ONTAP 9.2. So you might not have had a chance yet to actually look at this and see how to integrate it into your environments. So our first question that we are answering is, what is fabric pooling? And I can't address fabric pooling without addressing NetApp's new stance as being the data fabric. So instead of just being, the storage system guys, NetApp really wants to help address your entire architecture and your data services. So data fabric, here's their definition, right? Set of data services provide consistent capabilities both on-prem and in the cloud. So it's like becomes this seamless fabric weaving your data together between, what you might want immediately available on your on-prem systems versus content maybe that we need available to our cloud services that we are hosting already in things like AWS or Azure, and or maybe simply take advantage of storage resources that might be less expensive to us within the cloud. So there's quite a bit that NetApp has that kind of integrates with some of the main cloud providers of today, and they're always adding in and working with newer platforms. But FabricPool is just one of them. So FabricPool is, as you can see here, part of that data fabric architecture. And it's all about storage tiering for us, right? We've talked about storage tiering in the past, and usually we had to use like a third-party product to kind of automate tiering particular content to some other storage location. But now we actually have these storage tiering policies that we can apply to our volumes, and then automatically it will copy or actually move the data blocks over to cloud storage and or so like public cloud storage, you see AWS here, and our brand new addition, Azure, close to my heart because I've been working with Azure for many, many years. Or if you have a private cloud, then NetApp has its storage grid solution, and you can submit to buckets that are created over on the storage grid. So as I said, this is definitely one of the newer features available across the board. And again, only came out with ONTAP 9.2. So here's kind of the vision, right? The visual of it, where I might have my on-prem content. And then, you know, we know there's a lot of data that we're just keeping for like backup purposes, archive type purposes, data that was, you know, reports, customer solutions, whatever it is, proposals that were from years ago, but we are keeping them for, you know, legal reasons, we're keeping them for informational reasons, research reasons, whatever reasons, we keep around a lot of this data. And so the idea here is once we implement the FabricPool, then only the active data will remain like on-prem within our NetApp systems, but the inactive data will get moved to what we call the capacity tier. And so that capacity tier, again, that's going to be like the AWS storage or from Storage Grid, or as I said, from my newest family members in Azure. So general requirements, if you have all flash systems, so AFF systems, this is actually available by default. In fact, you get like 10 gig of storage by default for this. And if you have regular FAS systems, you need to have all SSD aggregates in order to apply this. So, you know, I created a pure all SSD aggregate, not a hybrid aggregate, right? Not one that's using like SATA drives for the actual storage and the SSDs are for caching purposes, but pure SSD aggregates will work with this. And it does work a bit with ONTAP Select, cloud volumes, which we're not going to go into, but those also work here. And I do need to have intercluster lifts defined for that communication with this storage system. So with the AWS, with Azure, or with wherever storage grid is running on-prem. So just some of the basic requirements, and then just here for reference type purposes, again, what exact systems, so what models are supported here. You can see the all-flash systems up there, and then in the FAS world, again, up through the 9000 series, a lot of the newer lower end series, it is supported, but notice the lovely little asterisk, only SSD aggregates for those guys. And then that capacity tier, we've got Amazon's basic S3 storage to a certain extent, Gov Cloud, notice not currently support the FIPS 142 compliancy for the Gov Cloud endpoint, but Azure Blob Storage, this is the newest piece, which I'll keep mentioning because that's what's exciting me nowadays. And then for on-prem, using NetApp Storage Scale as a destination for the capacity tier, that's what will be that option if you don't want to go for paying storage, say, through AWS or Azure. So basic process, again, just to set this up. And again, this process hasn't really changed, though the GUI's changed a little bit, right? System Manager's changed a little bit. So, you know, it's a little easier to configure through System Manager than it was in the past. But the overall basic process from 9.2 forward is I add what's called a bucket. So that's going to be like a container, as we'll see over in Azure. And then through NetApp, I add, like through System Manager, through the command line, I add what's called an external storage tier. And so the exact steps for that will depend obviously on what that external storage system is going to be. And one of the things that I'll mention again here is that for all flash systems, you get about 10 gig that you can store for free without having to have a license for this, like through AWS. But for anything more than that, or if you are using like FAS systems with the all SSD aggregates, you do need a license for integrating with AWS or with Azure. For storage grid, you don't. So just kind of, that's the external storage tier. So like I can't even configure AWS as my external storage grid on my FAS system unless I have the license for it. So just FYI. And then when I go and configure that, as we'll see, I have a couple of screenshots here. You know, again, depending upon what the external system is, there's some credential type information, you know, like a key or so, that has to be provided in order to establish that connection. So once I have the external storage grid, the storage tier defined, then, oh, I actually want to attach it to an aggregate. Oops, nice when I mess up certain things. So I'll want to associate the external storage grid with an aggregate. So like with that SSD aggregate, or of course any of my aggregates from my all flash systems. And then it's just a matter of applying the tiering policy to the volumes themselves. And so we'll talk about what some of those options are as we go through here. So here's just, you know, a visual. This is a screenshot actually of the Azure portal. And so creating a bucket in terms of Azure just means creating a blob container. So in Azure, they have storage accounts. I'll actually show you over here. This is one of my Azure accounts. And so I actually have multiple Azure storage account. Each Azure storage account has different types of containers for it. So the main one is actually the blob service. Like I have these accounts because I've got some, say, VMs that are running up in Azure, and these blob containers are being used to store the VHD files for those VMs. But if you scroll down, they also have like file services, which can be accessed through like SMB. They've got this table, queue services that are used for like dev purposes. But our main focus for these buckets is to go create a blob service container. So you would just come over here, click plus, give it a name, NetApp for fun. I can find NetApp 18. Oops, doesn't like the capital. I forget. There you go. And then you can define the structure for it, so, you know, like the security for it. Private means you'll have to specify a key. I do have anonymous capabilities, but usually we'll obviously just choose private, and we'll use a key that is generated for the storage account itself, and you can find the keys up here underneath the access keys. So you can copy like one of these keys and paste it over into the configuration windows when you are configuring that external storage tier. So first, obviously, I have to have a place to store it. Again, kind of showed you some of the steps that might be necessary if I were doing it in Azure. Slightly different, obviously, if I'm going to be doing it for AWS and or storage grid. I only have so much time in the world. So here we're seeing ONTAP 9.4's new system manager. Always looking slick in its new design. And so we've gone underneath the application and tiers over in our navigation structure on the left-hand side. And then from there, chosen storage tiers. And there you can see like external, I have the option for this external capacity tier over on the right-hand side. So I can just click on, you know, configure an external capacity tier, and then this is what will pop up for me. And so you can see I can immediately add one of the buckets that I might have created through storage grid on this particular system. It's one of the SIMs. They don't have the licenses for the SIMs at this point, but so I'd have to add in the licenses, but I'd have the ability to click on these add buttons over here. And then again, depending upon whether I chose Azure, AWS, you'll have different questions that it might ask me. So here, for example, is what I would see if I clicked on Azure. So external capacity provider is my blob storage, give it some sort of name. There is an FQDN that goes with your blob container. So you want to specify that. And then the name of your storage account down here. So like this is standard across all of Azure. Your account is your specific name that you gave to the storage account. So like my guys over here have some weird automatically generated names for my VMs like demo RG diag. And so that would be the name of the account. That's what I want to specify here. And then the key is that piece that I was showing you here, these keys over here. So you always have two keys that are automatically generated through Azure. So for example, if I wanted to cut off access to any system that was using the first key, then I could reset that key, but I'd still have like the other key to use. So that's why there are always these two keys that are available. So just make sure I know which one I'm using. And then the name of whatever container that I created. So that was the piece where I would have gone and created a new blob container to begin with. The container and give it that lovely name. And then say, okay. Right, so that container name like NetApp AT that I just created. Okay. So once you finish this, by the way, there is an option that this says save and attach aggregate. So remember my third bullet point, which for some reason I had volumes there. That's when you're going to attach it to an aggregate. So you're just associating this capacity tier basically with your performance tier. Again, the performance tiers would be what you have on-prem on your NetApp systems. The capacity tiers are what we are, of course, going to be moving the data over to. As I did mention, again, you do need licenses if you're going to use AWS or Azure. So they are cluster-wide licenses, which is nice. So I don't have to do that whole, one license per node kind of thing. And again, I don't need the license if I am using StorageGrid. The best practice is to use a certificate to establish the secure connection to StorageGrid. I do have the ability, as you can see, to like disable that if I want to. But best practice would be go through the process to install it. And so, part of the command line there is just security certificate install once you've generated that certificate. And then here we can see creating the object through the command line. So just, again, as usual, anything I can do through the GUI, I can do through the command line. So I'll have the same types of options available to me, whatever makes me feel more comfortable. Usually, you got that Windows background, you like the GUI, you got that Linux Unix background, you like the command line.
What do you prefer, Alicia?
I'm sorry, what?
What do you prefer?
What do I prefer? It depends upon what I'm doing, where I am. If it's something that I've got to do over and over again, then I prefer scripting and doing things through the command line. Mm-hmm. And if it's just something that I need to quickly get done, usually I'll go through System Manager, but if I'm already in the command line, then I might just do it through the command line. So I just switch back and forth.
So do you have to memorize all these commands though, or are they easily accessible?
There's help available. Like if you know the names of the objects, you can figure things out. So, I know something relating, this is going to be relating to aggregate. So I can do aggregate and I can do a question mark kind of thing. It'll show me all the subcommands for it. So you can figure things out. So again, like it's a quick something that I do quite often and I'm already in the command line. That's why I'll do it in the command line because I'm already familiar with that command. So it's not that complicated. Something like this, I'm not doing this kind of command every day. So, it's probably something I would do usually through System Manager ahead of time, unless it was part of like, I need to do this for a client. And so it might be part of a script that I'm just pulling together for that client because they're actually executing it on their end. So again, kind of depends. There are certain tasks, like relating to this, it doesn't really make a difference. There are certain tasks where I do prefer to do it through the command line because the GUI does auto magic stuff that really kind of annoys me. So I kind of don't like some of the auto magic stuff that it does. But yeah. So here now, as I said, so we've got our bucket defined in the cloud. We've got our external capacity defined as part of that wizard. If I were doing it through the GUI, it associated it with a particular aggregate. And so the final step is just applying the policy. So these policies are not ones that you will create. So they're not like snapshot policies or snap mirror policies where you go create them yourselves. These are built-in policies, and you're just choosing one of these 4 possible built-in policies. Now, if you look at the screenshot here, you actually only see 3 in the dropdown. That's because the 4th one is for backup volumes. So volumes that are like data protection volumes, i.e. like they're the destination of a snap vault or snap mirror type job. Those ones have the backup tiering policy can be applied to them. But like a regular active file system type, my users are connecting to this everyday type volume, those have the 3 possibilities that you see there: the snapshot only, auto, and none. And auto is the new member of the family. So the snapshot only is what was originally introduced in 9.2, and auto is the new guy, because auto is the one that is going to actually take active file, or like, well, sorry, data blocks that are part of the active file system, not just from my snapshots. And if those data files in the active file systems haven't been touched for, certain period, defaults like 31 days, then it will move them over to the capacity tier there. So yeah, it's as easy as just choosing the appropriate tiering policy here. None, of course, means that no tiering policy will be applied to it, and I can be done with the configuration set. So as I said, I've got actually 4 policies. So the first one there, the default is the snapshot only. Again, that was one of the original policies that I had. So that will just take what's in my snapshots, right? So again, but it's got to be data that hasn't been touched for 31 days. So just something to keep in mind, from the point in time that I apply the tiering policy. So I can apply the tiering policy when I create the volume, or now that you've heard my exciting explanation of what FabricPool does, you can go back to your environments and you can go and apply a tiering policy to your existing volumes. Either way, it's when I apply the policy that the timer basically starts. And so the timer then, again, even if that file has been there for like 10 years and nobody touched it, it'll still wait 31 days before it moves those data blocks over into the capacity tier. So the timer starts the minute I apply the policy. So I'm not going to see like immediate movement after I've applied the policy to those data blocks. I will have to wait the default of 31 days, or I can go adjust it, as you see here, at the range of 2 to 63 days. So yeah, so the lowest it can be is 2 days basically for it to be inactive. And then auto, the new option, these guys, again, 31 days for it to look at it as cold before it actually moves. Again, I can change that range from 2 to 63. Once they do read it again, so this is something I'll mention again as we go through this, but when they do want to go access those particular files, if it is random access to those files, right, random versus sequential, right, when we're categorizing the type of access to things. So if it is a random type access, like I just need to read file X right now, then the system will mark that no longer as cold data, but it will become hot data, and it's going to be moved back to my performance tier. If it is being accessed through a sequential read, like a backup or a indexing type process, something along those lines, then the system's smart enough to recognize, well, that data is still really inactive, right? They're just reading through it for these other processes that basically are trying to read through everything. And so we're just going to keep that data where it is. So Auto is smart enough to understand, the different types of access to the files and, change their status from hot or cold as appropriate. And then other policy that I mentioned, we didn't see in that screenshot because it was not a data protection volume, is backup. So as I said here, can only be set on my data protection volumes there. The entire volume actually gets moved over to the capacity tier, and this one moves over immediately, actually. So that makes life a little bit easier there. Again, they'll stay cold, remain in that capacity tier. And there's also, by the way, a way of moving volumes directly to the capacity tier. Basically, you're kind of marking them with the backup policy as you do the move. I didn't cover that here. It's a little bit more complicated, but and it's not an automatic kind of process, so it didn't really kind of go into my categories here. But that's something else that you can think about. And then none, of course, means that it won't be moving the data automatically at all. Okay, so again, keep in mind the data moves, okay, when it is marked as cold. Okay. And again, that marking as cold, the timer starts when I apply the policy. For the snapshot policy, got 2 days that it will wait to move those data files over. For the auto policy, the default is 31 days. You can change that range. For the backup policy, it actually will move immediately. Notice that what it starts doing is kind of groups those data blocks until it gets full 4 meg blocks to move out there. So just kind of optimizing so I'm not moving little 4K at a time kind of thing. And another thing that it does, so even if I have a lot of old data, is it's not going to move it unless my aggregate, my source aggregate, i.e. that performance tier, has less than 50% availability. So, we've got huge aggregates nowadays, right? We got really big dips. So it might not actually even kick in after that 31 days because maybe I'm only using 40% of the space available within my aggregate. So just something else to keep available. Don't panic if you're not seeing the data move after you think that it should be. It should be moved over there. Okay. So as I said, that tiering policy, I can apply it at the time that I create a volume. I can also come along and modify it after the fact, so that I can again do it through the GUI or the command line. But here you can see there's a little more actions window. I have the change tiering policy. By the way, this actually, it only will work with, again, regular volumes. So like those root volumes of the SVMs won't apply to those guys. Okay. So any questions at this point? Let's see. I don't see any questions out here, so I'm going to continue on. Joseph, did you have a question for me?
You already answered it
Okay.
about the GUI or the command lines.
No worries. All right. So the rest of this is just kind of actually recapping some of and reiterating the newest features that are built into it. So again, kind of 2 parts. I want to make sure you understood what fabric pooling was doing in general. And of course, in my excitement to show you 9.4, I want to show you what you can do or what is new in regards to fabric pooling for 9.4. So one of them was the active file system tiering. So, nice. I love these graphics, actually. Actually stole this from the best practice guide, which is awesome. I have a link to it at the end of this. It's great. Great guide, actually. So here you can see, I've got my on-prem. So this is, my primary cluster over here. Some of my content is like, active. This is some of my snapshot data. And this is the quote unquote inactive data based upon whatever time period we think would apply for an inactive data. And then with active file system, notice the blue, which is the inactive data, as well as the snapshot data, is getting copied to that bucket. Look, it looks like a little bucket over here, right? So it's getting copied over to that bucket, whether that bucket's AWS, Azure, or Storage Grid, or it's getting moved over to that bucket. So what I'm seeing in my primary system within my, my active system is only the active data. And thus, I have a lot more gray space here, i.e. provision space available to be utilized for whatever I need to do. All the data that I wasn't really needing right now has been moved someplace else. Okay? And of course, this is all seamless to my end users, so they would be clueless. And I just want to kind of compare, again, that active file system tiering to what we had in 9.2. Because again, in 9.2, I just had the backup and snapshot. What I got with 9.4 was the active file system. So this guy gives me, for some reason that carried over into that slide. This slide gives me the idea that all that is copied over, obviously, is the purple part, right? So the only thing that I'm missing after I apply the storage tiering is the purple section, and that's just my snapshots, which is fine. Again, obviously did save me some space. I've got more space available, but true storage tiering would say, like, I'm not going to care whether this is for backup, whether this is snapshot, whether this is files that are part of the active file system. True storage tiering should be taking care of all my content to move it over. So again, snapshot copying, tiering just copied over snapshot. And that was interesting how this came out. Anyway, this one is showing that I've got a primary cluster over here, and I'm either snap mirroring or snap vaulting, right? That's the snap mirror icon there, and this is my snap vault icon. Snap mirroring or snap vaulting to a like secondary cluster, and then all the content basically that was being snap mirrored, all those backed up volumes, those are what are being moved over to my buckets. So again, this is the one that again applies immediately. So I designate this as a data protection volume. I apply the backup storage tier policy to it. And once we start the replication, it's actually moving the data blocks to the cloud solution, whatever that might be. So again, new fun in 9.4 is the auto volume tiering. And default for this one, 31 days versus snapshot. Again, it was 2 days, and backup, it was immediate. Okay? And random reads, it will change that status of the volumes. They're now hot data. They're actually going to move back to my performance tier versus if I'm just doing regularly scheduled, backup indexing type processes that are sequential reads, then it will keep them over in the cold tier. And just because it's always fun to see how to do things both ways, here we have it in the command line as well. Now, by the way, to change the minimum cooling days, I love how long the name of that particular parameter is, the tiering minimum cooling days parameter, I actually need to be in advanced mode in order to change that. And I can only change that through the command line. Okay. And then the Azure support. Yay, Azure. So we had AWS, we have Azure. They're starting to work with Google and some others that are out there. So, we keep seeing other cloud providers having some integration. AWS was the first. Azure's been coming along second. So again, this should be evolving over time for us. As far as efficiency is concerned, we do get to take advantage of the fact that any of those data blocks that we have compacted, deduped, compressed, they're being copied over in their compacted, deduped, and compressed state over to the capacity tier. So we will still take advantage of any of the storage savings that we got from that. And in case you forgot, I said it before, and I like to repeat myself, not because I'm senile, but because you only tend to remember about 10% of what I actually say. Remember, cold blocks that are accessed through random reads will then become hot, and those that are accessed through sequential reads will remain cold. And last but not least is the improvements as far as reporting is concerned. So the minute that I enable the policies for particular volumes, then I will start getting this inactive data reporting, basically telling me how much of my data is actually cold data, thus how much I'm going to be able to move over to whatever that external capacity tier is. But one of the nice things that you can also play with is you can enable the monitoring, basically the reporting portion for volumes that are currently not configured to be part of a FabricPool. So it can give you an estimate of like how much space would I save, right? Wouldn't that be helpful? So again, amount of cold always depends upon the fact that it's monitoring. By default, is enabled on those aggregates that are, you know, basically have policies that are storage tiering or have volumes that have storage tiering policies applied to them. But those that do not have volumes with storage tiering policies applied to them, I can enable the reporting for them as well. So the reporting can be something as simple as this, right? So if I look at my storage tiers over in System Manager, so that was, where is my system? Has time to get up, he did. If I look at my storage tiers over here, again, that's underneath the section of application and tiers, which you might not have explored a whole bunch. I would see these, you know, additional reporting here of my space savings. Again, I don't have it configured on this particular box, but this is where I would navigate to within System Manager to go see how much I actually am going to save, how much is cold, and then I can query off of those for like report purposes. So here we're seeing we have a few extra fields: performance tier, inactive user data, performance tier, inactive user data %. So I can get that included in like certain reports or using performance manager. You can, you know, get that as part of the reports that you're looking at there. And then if I want to enable it for aggregates that are not enabled for FabricPool, this is the option. So modify aggregate, and is inactive data reporting enabled? Set it to true. So yeah, in answer to your question, Joseph, I don't often memorize these things, but you can see they're really not trying to make it cryptic. So if I can like view a list of like what the options are, it's usually pretty easy to figure out which option will be appropriate. Because now they have these really long names. All right. So looks like my time period is somewhat up as far as my chitty chatting is concerned. This is the TR. So TR 4598. I encourage you to go and download it from the NetApp site. It is really a well written as well as quite extensive description of, you know, the options that are available, how to actually go through all the configuration. It will include, or it does include, you know, how to go through configuration for Amazon, you know, AWS, as well as StorageGrid, if you want to choose one of those options and not my lovely Azure world. Again, is a really good resource in regards to working with the FabricPool. So I hope you guys have found this helpful. And any questions at this point? I'll go look in the chat. Let's see. What tools are available to profile how much storage we marked as cool? Yeah, so I just talked about the reporting. Again, you can actually see it through, obviously, System Manager. If you're using something like Performance Manager, which, you know, integrates with On-Command Unified Manager, it would be tapping into those counters so you can see the information there. Newer version, once the new version of Unified Manager comes out, it should have that information available as well. The block stored in the capacity tier count towards the one, no, actually no, so no limit that's applying as far as what's moved into the capacity tier. So your limit as far as storage there is based upon how much you want to pay for Amazon or Azure storage, which is also very, very nice. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question from Jennifer.
Okay. Where am I going to see that?
She's IMing me right now. Just waiting for her. I guess she's not typing, but I think that was great. Alicia, thank you so much for doing this webinar for us.
No problem. I had a lot of fun. So hopefully.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and thank the audience. Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you have any additional questions or
There's a
feedbacks,
question.
there is another question. Perfect. From
Yeah,
Doug.
yeah. No, as I mentioned, on FAS systems, it's only supported for all SSD aggers, so there are no support for non-SSD aggers. Yeah. So, no. No support for non-SSD aggers. Anyway, did you want to remind them of where they can send questions if they have them?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like Doug has an additional question. Do you see it?
We're having it. Yeah. So if you had to see it, if you wanted to see whether volume would benefit, you'd have to move it to an SSD agger.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I think it's really part of like those all flash systems. Look at those. Are we throwing you off, Joseph? They trickle in?
No, I'm totally fine. All right. Well, that concludes our webinar on ONTAP 9.4 FabricPool enhancements. If you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions, you could always email me at joseph.kaskasian@quickstarts.com. And thank you so much. And we'll look forward to having you at our next webinar. And have a great day. Alicia, thank you so much.
Thank you.